G'day, y'all. This is episode number 3 of the Matt Sweeny Show. I talk with Scott Niswonger about his journey as an entrepreneur. Let's go.
Thank you. Good to be with you today, Matt.
So, this show is about the philosophy of freedom and practical entrepreneurship. And of particular interest to me is the founding of America and teaching people how to pursue the American dream. And so I'm really excited to speak with you because you are, from my perspective, the most successful entrepreneur in our region.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
And the approach I'm taking is speaking the truth in love. So I really just want to explore your journey, and I think that your journey will inspire others to take a similar path and to look at becoming entrepreneurs themselves. And so let's start at the beginning. Where did you grow up?
Matt, I grew up in a small farm town in northwestern Ohio, a little town called Van Wert. My grandparents had a farm, and so I grew up on that farm, spent my summers there, and what was the product of a single parent, my mother, and uh, and my grandfather lived with us.
So that to kind of understand what was the population of that town?
Well, it's about half the size of Greenville. It's between 10 and 11,000. It was then a number of years ago, and it is now the same size because it is a farming community, and there is some industry there, but it got swept away to a large extent in the days of the Rust Belt. Cleveland, Pittsburgh, when all of that moved offshore, steel, all of that, it affected our little community in that folks that worked 8 hours in one of the factories there, that was nothing because they were going home and work another 16 hours on the farm. And so then it thrived. It was really a thriving community, and it's beginning to come back now.
Okay, well, can I tell you an interesting little fact that I found out? And you may know this, but both Van Wert, Ohio, and Greenville, Tennessee are named after heroes of the American War of Independence.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the next kind of layer to that is that Greenville is named for Nathaniel Greene, who not only was he a general for George Washington, who was really good at guerrilla warfare and helped save the South, but he was a logistics pioneer, like
Yeah.
you. So your hometown is also named for a logistics pioneer.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that I have drawn several of those similarities after I came here for a year, and we can get into that. I came here for just a year, uh, 50 over 50 years ago. So it there were many reasons that I stayed, and we can talk about that if you like.
yeah, well, I would like to talk about that, and I think maybe talking about that within the context of your family. So you mentioned that that you were raised by your mother and your grandfather.
Hmm.
And the reason that I think this is particularly important to talk about, I've been going to some high schools around here lately, talking to high school students, and something that was a surprise for me um, was the majority of students in public high schools around here are not from families that have a mother and a father. The majority of them are from single parent families. And that, I mean, that's not a good fact, and it's certainly not a good trend. I mean, I looked into this a little bit, and I read that children from single parent families are more likely to have challenges with mental health, education, and criminal activity. And so I thought your story would be inspiring to the majority of students in our region who are not growing up with a mum and a dad. So if you could talk more about that, I
Yeah.
think that would be really interesting.
I participated in all of those. No, just kidding. Uh, well. the father figure for me was in fact my grandfather. And um, but growing up, then spending the summers on this farm, uh, I became entrepreneurial before there was such a term used. At a very young age, they would let me at 10 or 12 years old would let me grow an entire row of sweet corn, and that sweet corn gets picked in August and September. And so I thought I was a really rich kid because I'd sell bushels of sweet corn in town just as the county fair was coming. So I had a pocket full of money from the sale of that sweet corn, and that taught me at a very early age that there could be a correlation between hard work and monetary reward.
Yep. So I think you answered my next question, which I was going to ask, like, if you always had an interest in business or entrepreneurship growing up.
I did. Very, very early. I mean, tricycle age. I remember we were in a flight path, although we were in Ohio, we're only 7 miles from Indiana. And we're only 30 miles from Fort Wayne, Indiana, and the airport there is called Bear Field. And a lot of commercial traffic and it was sort of right over our house. And I can remember being on about my furthest memory that I can go back, riding that tricycle and seeing these airplanes let down into Fort Wayne, Indiana, saying to myself, I want to do that. That's what I want to do. And that led to, building model airplanes and getting into radio controlled airplanes and all of that. And I had an aunt that gave me on my 12th or 13th birthday $25. And she said, I want to go out to the airport and I'd like for you to take your first airplane ride. And so I was 12. And at that age, the rides were like $5. And so I took 5 rides with the $25, got to know at the local airport, which was just not over 2 miles from where I lived, know the people at the airport. They knew of my interest in aviation. And so then I'd wax and wash airplanes for the owners just to get a ride. But what that allowed me to, and then I had a huge paper route that I'd deliver in the evenings. And so I always had about 60 or $100 in my pocket from the time I was 12 years old, and investing it in those flying lessons. And so on my 16th birthday, which is the earliest date that you could solo an airplane, I soloed, matter of fact, the picture's behind me here. I soloed 2 aircraft on my birthday, which was July the 2nd. And the next year, I was kept studying, kept flying. I was able to get my private license on my 17th birthday, kept working, kept flying, kept studying, and scheduled my check ride for a commercial license, which required 200 hours of flight time, which I had well beyond that. But on my 18th birthday, the Midwest weather got me, the thunderstorms rolled in, and so I ended up getting my commercial license 2 weeks after my 18th birthday.
Wow, that's
And
fantastic. Is that before you were driving?
I soloed before I had a driver's license.
Wow. Very, very cool.
I don't know if you, matter of fact, here's one of the, you would, I don't know if you can see
I can
that
see that.
photo.
Yep.
It's a Piper Colt, like a Piper Tri-Pacer. And that's me getting, the instructor is walking behind the airplane. And that picture was taken by my mother on my 16th birthday.
That's
So,
fantastic.
yeah.
I'm amazed you have that photo.
Well, I just happened to find that just a few days ago.
Okay.
I didn't know it existed.
Wow.
But
Very cool.
so the longer I was around aviation, the more I was interested in the business side as well as being a pilot. And I always say, by the grace of God, not my high school transcript, I was accepted into a very elite program at Purdue University, who had the first 4-year degree in aviation technology. They also owned that the university owns and owned the first, said it 3 times now, first university owned airport in America from the late 1920s. And Amelia Earhart taught at Purdue
Hmm.
and taught women's studies before there was such a thing, and flight instructor.
Okay.
The airplane, oddly enough, a little factoid, the Lockheed 10 airplane that she was lost in the Pacific on a round the world mission was donated by Purdue Research Foundation and was equipped there at Purdue. I guess the essence of that is the airplane's ever found, it belongs to Purdue Research. And, almost 100 years later, I guess, I'm on the Purdue Research Board. And so I take great pride in that. And aviation was so important at Purdue. And they had, when the program was there, I would have never made it as a liberal arts student or an engineer. Almost didn't make it through high school because I had no interest. I wasn't seeing, and this is an important point, I think, because I'm sitting here at the Niswonger Foundation that specializes, our goal is pre-K through 12 education and great educations for every student we come in contact with across the state. One size does not fit all, is my point. And my point being, I wouldn't have made it Purdue unless it was the exact same thing that I wanted to do, which was learn to fly. There was a third party there that provided, they were an airline. It's called a supplemental 121 airline, mostly 95% passenger work. And so they carried, my first big airplane experience was to the University of Tennessee. Little did I know 2 years later, I'd be living at the foot of the Almighty over there in Knoxville, but picking up the football team. And so they had a lot of military charters, and they had all the Big Ten teams and just teams all over the country. And so you were training on these airplanes in addition to the first year of general studies and science and English and speech and all of that. You would being trained in the classroom. It's like almost like flight safety is today, where you go to get a type reading in a jet. You get a type reading in an airplane. And my first airplane, and this is really weird, this story, was in a DC-3. Well, the DC-3 was first built and went into airline service in 1937. A month ago, I got current again. I hadn't flown a DC-3 in over 50 years. There's one setting in my hangar that came here that needed to winter and be worked on. And so I have this beautiful American Airlines DC-3 sitting in the hangar. And I said, I'll let you keep it in my hangar, but you got to send an instructor up here and I want to get current again.
Wow. Do
And
you like the piston engine?
I was so fortunate to be at the end of the piston era, DC-3s, DC-6s, DC-7s. The year after I graduated, and we had 5 DC-6s and 4 DC-3s at Purdue Airlines. That was what it was called, although it was owned by a third party. But here's what happened. It couldn't happen in a million years, but what's happened to me here. But so you worked in weather, you worked in operations, you worked in maintenance, you worked in dispatch, You were around the salespeople, and then you were learning to fly these airplanes in an airline operation. Well, little did I know. So the year after I graduated, all of that went away and they went to DC 9s, 90 passenger DC 930s. So I made it just by that much. I was able to participate in the end of the what I call the golden age of aviation.
What do you like about the piston engines compared to the jet engines?
Well, back then, it wasn't you just keep going. You hop around, you hop around, you hop around, point A to B to C to D in the jets. And in this a charter operation, this charter airline, there'd be five of us, crew of five on the DC-6s, and you would usually go a good distance with those airplanes. They were four-engine piston, and you'd go a good distance, and then because it was a charter, you'd be somewhere for 2 or 3 days. And the captains were all retired military folk with been there, done that all over the world, and so you're learning all of these experiences. I call it practical wisdom, and that's what the degree was about for me at Purdue. If it had not been for that, I'd probably be flying somebody's magnificent airplane and living the life.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It sounds like the program was very practical and hands-on, and that was really key for you to then become an entrepreneur. Like if that had been a theoretical program, it probably wouldn't have taught you what you needed to know.
Well, that's exactly right. And so the next chapter there, Matt, was the so I was going to work for United Airlines, and they furloughed a lot of pilots. And the Magnavox company, that was the largest employer in Eastern Tennessee at the time, was headquartered here with making consumer electronics. They were headquartered in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and a friend of mine had just gone to work for them, not knowing what I was going to do next. We rolled into Fort Wayne on a Saturday. The chief pilot was there, and I went to work for Magnavox on Monday. Shortly thereafter, he said, everybody's families up here. They're all from the Fort Wayne area, married with kids. And would you, for the time that it'll be before you get called back to United, would you go down there and set up an airplane for a year? And this little corporate twin should have had some more pictures for it. Anyhow, so I came down here, reminded me of Van Wert. Back then, agriculture was a very, very important component, still is, but not at the magnitude it was then. And so set that up. And about 6 months into that assignment, the president of Magnavox Consumer Electronics said, Scott, can you get us a small freighter? Back then, supply chain was as screwed up as it is now, but for different reasons. And so I talked to doctors, Dr. Kenneth Susong, they've both passed, Dr. Kenneth Susong and Dr. Ralph Brown, their office was a block away from me here at the foundation. I see it every morning and think fondly of them. They were pilots, wanted a twin engine airplane to go on the weekends to their condo in Myrtle Beach and take their families. And I said, well, if you'll buy the airplane, I'll lease it from you through the week. We'll take all the seats out, put plywood in. We can go pick up capacitors and resistors and picture tubes and you name it to keep assembly lines. Back then, there was no mechanization to that. It would be a row of 200 or 300 ladies sitting there soldering, putting screws in. It didn't come to much, much later, sort of the Japanese style of automation that eliminated a good number of those jobs. But so I hired a pilot that was looking for work out of Asheville, and we started flying this airplane every day. The next thing I knew, a company here, it's now called Parker Hannifin in Greenville, was called TRW. Oddly enough, this division was David, had been an entrepreneur by the name of David Ross at Purdue, headquartered in Lafayette, Indiana. And they had a plant here, Lebanon, Tennessee, and Lafayette. But he invented the steering gear for the automobile, and then power steering and all that stuff. So they built this plant. We're way behind on a military contract of steering gears like this for big, heavy duty trucks, 80 pounds a piece. And we started flying twice a day, sometimes 3 times a day to South Bend and Detroit for that automotive military contract. And so I said to Mr. Mahar, who there's a great story associated with this, but maybe we'll get to it. But I took a 1-page business plan to him, got an hour of his time, very busy individual. And I showed it to him and I said, I think I can create a business out of what we're doing here. And he said, well, I think you can too. What's your hesitation? Well, I'm coming to an important point for our audience, I think. So what's your hesitation? And I said, well, back then you thought if you worked for a big company that it was cradle to grave, right? You started and you had a pension and that was before the days of the 401k, and you had a seniority number and so on and so on. And insurance. And he said, well, he thought a minute and he said, what if I gave you a 2-year leave of absence from Magnavox? Oh, your seniority would stay in place, and you might have to go back to Fort Wayne to fly because they had 7 airplanes up there and we had just that one here and really needed 2 or 3. But anyhow, we had just the one here. And I said, I think that will do it. Well, I remember this as though it were today. He looked over his shoulder and he said, Mary, come here. I want you to dictate a letter. Back then, it was all shorthand on a pad. And he dictated a leave of absence. He signed it. I signed it. And I walked out of there an hour later as a free agent. And the thing I wanted to say was to folks listening is, I mentioned back then you thought that security evolved around the business that you worked for. Well, I would say to everyone, there is no security in life except what you make for yourself. Don't rely on someone else to provide that. Be wise enough to take that upon yourself. And what I mean by that is you're looking at financing a home or a car or whatever. Just have enough set back that anything could change. And today, they say the average person will work 7 different jobs in their career. Back then, you just thought there'd be one, and for many there were, but not today. So anyhow, 6 months later, we had, I can't remember, 6 or 7 airplanes flying. This thing had really developed into a pretty big business. So I turned in my resignation to Magnavox and started full-time building an airline. So I take you back to where we started, Purdue University. And this experience can be Tusculum or Purdue, in that I was learning every aspect there of an airline. Had I not had that experiential learning, I wouldn't have known where to have begun. I was a pilot, but because I'd had all of that, we started to build a 121 airline with big freighter aircraft. And we all loved it here. And so we built that of all the odd places, Greenville, Tennessee, expanded our airport. And that became a company called General Aviation, which was a contractor to all the air cargo industry with large Convair aircraft carrying 15 to 20,000 pounds of cargo every night.
So I just have one question about the startup phase of that business. How did you go and get customers? Um, that is, I think in the early phase, some advice, for example, that Y Combinator gives, it'd be interesting to see if you agree with this or not, but they say it's better to have a small number of customers who love your product or your service than a large number of customers that are lukewarm initially. So I wonder if you agree with that, but in particular, how did you go and get those first few customers?
Well, let me take the second question, the latter first. Sometimes that could be true, a small number of customers. The the month before well, let me conclude that. Um, so we ended up trucking was deregulated in the early 80s, and I saw that coming. And I'm like, well, we're flying airplanes from Charlotte, Indianapolis, Chicago, and back, and charging our customer $1.25 a pound for main deck freighter space. If I can put that on a truck with a team of drivers at 25 cents a pound, my customer will see a huge savings to the ultimate customer. So back to your question, the month before we went public with the next company called Land Air, which is a surface transportation company, we lost our largest customer, and it almost killed us. I mean, that company represented 25 or 30% of our business, and we didn't know if we were going to get the IPO off, and that was 1993. So you need to be selective about your customers, but it's like when you build a business, you don't want just one bank. And I could go on all afternoon with these examples. You want two banks. You want somebody sort of competing for the business, not controlling your destiny if they get the whim that they don't want to be in the trucking business anymore, which happened to me. And
Yeah, by the way, I learned that when Silicon Valley Bank almost collapsed. You don't want to have the company's money
yeah,
in one bank.
yeah,
But okay, so just to drill in, how did
yeah.
you get those first few customers? Because I think a lot of entrepreneurs at that stage where they don't know if it's going to work or not yet. Yeah, how did you get them?
Well, when we go back to the Magnavox days, they came to me and said, "We have a problem." And so my whole career, and I love this. I mean, this keeps me awake at night. It gets me up in the morning. I love this. And a customer or someone you're calling on says, and I will ask this: what keeps you awake at night? What's your worst problem? Let me solve it. And if I do solve it, I'd like to have the business. And so the first customer came to me. The second customer came to me back in the airline days. And then we began to develop a small sales force. Mike Roberts, who he was my vice president of marketing when we got to the point we could afford really a staff. And for over 30 years, our offices were right next to each other. And both at General Aviation and at Land Air, and then at Forward Air. The latter two we took those public. That's a day that forever changed my life.
Yeah, I want to talk. I want
Getting
to
to do
talk
this.
about that, but I think these early days are really enlightening. So, so you start. So just to recap, you started General Aviation. You grew it. You sell it. You saw deregulation of trucking coming, so you started Land Air. Um, how and the customers were coming to you. How did you think about pricing for those customers, or how did you think about profit margins? It's one thing to start making money, it's another thing to make money profitably. So how did you think about that?
Oh, I just have to share an anecdote with you. First of all, we always used to say, it's one thing to be tired, meaning you're working your butt off, It's another thing to be tired and hungry, which means you aren't getting paid enough for what you're doing. So we never want to let those two combine themselves and take you down. We were open book. We would price our product where we could make a 10% gross margin, and we
Okay.
never allowed our SG&A, our sales and general administrative expense, to exceed 5 or 6%. And so that's the way we priced the product. And again, we were very early in that business, and we were extremely early in land air being moving the full truckloads of freight from airport to airport for non-integrated air freight forwarders. And what that means is they're not UPS and they're not Federal Express. They don't have their own captive fleet of trucks and airplanes, and they would rely on us. And then this built the reputation for Forward Air that we had started in 1990, which was less than truckload, an LTL carrier, if you will, but just serving the air cargo community of non-integrated forwarders. And there are about 600 or 700 of those.
Okay,
And
so
yeah,
so let me say that back to you. So um figure out how much it costs to run your business, keep a tight control on SG&A, and then you charged a 10% margin on top of that, and you were transparent with your customers about your pricing and your margin because
yep,
10% is pretty reasonable.
yep,
Great. Okay.
yep. And
Very
it depends
interesting.
what you're multiplying it by. But yes.
Yes. So, okay. So, and you touched on it there, but what was the relationship between land air and forward air?
Well, land air, we started in the early 80s, and it was full truckload dedicated service. We were looking for routes like where we were flying the airplanes. And then other customers, we did dedicated work for people like John Deere. We actually built the John Deere Gator on their behalf as a contractor for over 10 years in Wisconsin. That was the later stages of land air. And then we saw the air freight, the airplanes going away, and that these non-integrated air freight forwarders needed somebody they could give an 800-pound pallet to in Charlotte and have us deliver it in Milwaukee. So we built a hub there where I forgot a step, but between after I started land air, one of our largest customers was a company called Flying Tigers. And they were, excuse me a minute, they were the largest air cargo operator in the world. And the largest fleet of 747 freighters, and a military contractor was about half their business. And they asked, when they went into the door-to-door business, they asked me to bring up the trucks, find a place to build the hub, to sort freight for both trucks and airplanes. And I picked the Rickenbacker Air Force Base that had just been decommissioned with two 12,000-foot runways. And they built their hub there. And so I had all of North America surface freight, their trucks. I put land air, I had a partner at the time before he passed, Ed Saylor. And so I spent 2 years building that network out for them. Well, I came back when my partner was diagnosed with terminal cancer to Greenville, and um, decided I loved Flying Tigers, but 18 months later, Federal Express bought them for all of the international rights. They were the first carrier, because they go back to pre-Second World War days, of defending the Chinese against the Japanese, and the Chinese didn't forget that. And they allowed Flying Tigers to have scheduled routes in and out of China before any airline. So anyhow, So FedEx really didn't understand the freight business back then. They got it mastered now, but they shut down that hub in Columbus. And so all these forwarders that were using them said, can you put this truck network back together? And so we went through 3 terminal facilities till we built what today's a 200-door cross-dock operation. And if you think about what Forward Air does to what Federal Express does over Memphis with airplanes, we were doing the same things with expedited trucks in and out of Columbus. Rolling in at night, sorting the freight, turning it around, rolling in at the daytime, sorting it, turning it around. I mean, from coast to coast, it grew into coast to coast. And that company today does about $3 billion in sales. And we got Land Air up to 250 or 300 million at its peak.
And you started that with, what was it, a $2,000 investment?
Yeah, Ed and I put $2,000 a piece. I don't know if you could do this today or not, but we put $2,000 a piece into a checking account at what was then the Greene County Bank. And that's back to the story of you need more than one banker, because about 3 years into them financing a dozen or 2 dozen trucks for us, president of the bank called me in at lunch one day and said, we really don't want to be in this trucking business anymore. We can't. And this was before we were public. I mean, we're 12 or 15 trucks. So we don't want to be in this. Well, what he said was, buddy boy, we really don't want to be in this trucking business anymore. We don't know where those assets are if we had to go get them. So you need to make other arrangements. And I'm like, oh, really? Okay. So I walked out the door of Greene County Bank at the corner of Depot and Main Street, and I walked down to First Tennessee Bank, and there stood the local president, Charlie Womble, and Larry Estep. Larry is still a very, very close friend, and got me out of the suit. And they said, we can handle that. Come on in. Come on, tell us about this. And so we started banking relationship there and a banking relationship with Bank of America. And I always thought what the president of Greene County Bank thought about 8 years later, 7 years later, when we went public and paid everyone off and our stock rose to $28. And then we split the two companies, Land Air and Forward Air, into two public companies in 1998. If you owned a share of Land Air, you got a share of Forward Air when we split them. Forward Air within 12 months rose to $53.75 a share. And Land Air stayed in $16 to $18 range, got down to 13. When it did that, I was pretty far along in my career, and having taken these two companies public as the sole owner, I had some power to maneuver and do some other things. And I had seen what was happening here in this bend of Appalachia with all the little rural schools. We've got one called Clinch, and I love it, up on the Kentucky-Tennessee border that we support, that had no foreign language, had no AP coursework. None of our high schools in Greene County had AP courses. And so I bought back the half of Land Air that was public at $13 or $14 a share. And then we used that. My partner, I sold him a half interest over the years. John Tweed, who is still here, has his own foundation, as do I. And he and I both work on educational needs in the region. And so nobody had ever seen this model. We were using a for-profit logistics company everybody get their bonuses. Everybody, we did real well. There was only one year that we had a loss because of depreciation in the entire history from year one with the $4,000. Uh, but so we would take the free cash flow from that, from Land Air, and we developed, beginning in 2001, the Niswonger Foundation to try and raise the tide high enough that all of the rural schools could have the same quality and rigorous coursework as school with the density. I'm looking across the street here at Walter State and then the Greenville High School. You got 1,000 students, you can afford teachers and AP coursework. But if you got 50 students, you can't. And
Yeah.
so that began our online efforts ever before it was ever popular.
So I want to dig into Niswonger Foundation. Just a couple questions that I'm interested in hearing the answer to. So along the entrepreneurial journey, what was the point in time where you woke up and you're like, I'm rich now? And like, what was the mechanism that enabled that? Was it salaries, bonuses? Was it when the companies went public and you sold stock? Like, what was the moment where the successful business became personal financial success?
Well, the day we went public
Okay.
as sole owner was the
Yep.
day that certainly changed my life and the lives of the people that I worked with. And I want to interject something in here, and it may not fit, but I need to say this before I forget it. And that is, from an entrepreneurial standpoint, I was never afraid, first of all, do the work, get out and load the boxes, fly the airplane, well, whatever it took, clean the bath. It didn't matter. It just didn't matter. Everybody just did what they needed to do to accomplish the mission. But I was never afraid and always looked to hire people that were smarter than I'm a pretty good generalist. Just the background, the education I've just shared with you. But my CFO was a lot smarter than I was. And my chief operating officer and then my president were all much smarter in their harness than I was. And I think that is a key to success. And it can also be scary. I've got someone that's dealing with that right now where uh, they need to hire someone that knows a lot more about the business side than they know about the science side. So that's important. But I
Yeah.
forgot what you asked me, other
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
yeah,
You
the day
answered
we
it. Yeah.
went public
Yeah.
forever changed my life.
Okay. So then, another question I have is, you said that you're accepted to Purdue by the grace of God. And I think some people hear that and think you're speaking metaphorically. I get the sense that you mean it. So if I could ask you a personal question, could you speak to that?
Yes. Um, well, I was raised in went through catechism in the Lutheran church. I knew Sunday school and from as long as I can remember. And my grandfather taught me a lot, and he was a professional. He and my great grandfather started the first, either the first or one of the first banks in Van Wert, Ohio, and then got wiped out by the Depression in '29. And then he went to work. He was a magistrate and went to work in the courthouse. So I was always by his side on Saturdays. He'd work Saturday morning, take me to lunch. But he started when he retired. He at 70, late 70s. He was in his late 70s. There would be people come to our home in the evening, elderly ladies and older gentlemen, and I remember asking him. I said, Grandpa, what are we doing here? What are these people doing? Why are they coming to visit with you? And he said, well, I have a skill set with the law, I know the law. And the lady that was just here lost her husband, and I'm working to get her military survivor benefits because he had been in the military. And he said, "You may not understand all of this now." It's kind of like that insurance commercial. "Son, you may not understand this now, but there'll be a day that you will." And so that was that upbringing and faith. We prayed every night, um, and has always just been part of my upbringing. And I think it's so important. And you're right, it wasn't a metaphor when I said that. There were 16 people, except in my class at Purdue, in this professional pilot program. Uh, last year, there were 1,600 applicants for 120 slots. And honestly, if I had my transcript, I'd hold it up here and it'd allow everybody a really good laugh. But the only thing that I liked were drafting and things like that, and basic math skills. I think we've gotten away from that. I don't need four math courses if you're headed for a certification program. And you know, we degraded that over the years, thinking that, oh, you've got to go to college and everybody's forcing everybody to college. Well, I wouldn't have been there had it not been a very tailored program to exactly what I wanted to do. I would have not been there, and I wouldn't have been successful at something else. So just along those lines, you know, we've all read the book. You know, you're in kindergarten, you hold hands crossing the street, and do unto others as you want done to you. It's true. It's true. And if you're always thinking of those around you, good things will happen for you. But you need to look out. It's like the mission of the foundation. We have 46 full-time employees here now from 2 in 2001, and we have 600 adjunct that are teaching online courses and in classrooms. Now, having said that, there are only 3 people in the corporate office. There are only 3 people. Everyone else is out in the classroom with the student. And the thing that I'm focusing on now is the things I just talked about here recently, which is the tutoring and mentorship. We didn't talk much about mentorship yet, but the tutoring of taking kids, mostly in the rural schools, but big schools too, and helping them find a path. And not only a path, where will that take you to school? I mentioned to you Clinch, which is 50-some student high school. It's too far to bus down to Rogersville. When we got involved in our council advising, there are school counselors, different function than the advisor class that we have, and we've got, gosh, I don't know how many out there. But they're meeting with students that may be first generation high school students. That first class that we had up there had 6 or 7 graduates. We sent 2 to diesel mechanic school for 2 years in Nashville. And this is part of our pretty far reaching scholarship program. And when they came back, they went to work at our Navistar dealership called Landmark in Knoxville, making like $28 an hour and living 45 minutes from where they grew up. I mean, wonderful, wonderful path and something they wanted to do. We got one to Lincoln Memorial, 45 minutes the other way from Clinch. We got one to Walter State, and I think one to ETSU, all first generation higher ed, who in their senior year, starting their senior year, none of them knew what they wanted to do. None of them. And so we've lost that ability. You know, the old German model of apprenticeship and all that, you'll see that returning because we need people that have a skill set, have a desire, and have the skill set to do those kind of things and make really good livings doing it.
Now, I really
I
want
think
to
I
talk
got
about.
off your track.
No, no, that was great. I really want to talk about the Niswonger Foundation, but I just want to check, do you have a hard stop at the top of the hour, or can we run over a little?
Depends on if I start coughing, actually.
Okay,
We
okay.
can go over just a little, man. I'm
Great, great. I appreciate it.
enjoying this very, very much. I hope
This
I
is
haven't put
fantastic.
everybody to sleep.
No. And so uh I read Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go, even when he is old, he will not depart from it.
Beautiful.
So perhaps that's a good lead into the Niswonger Foundation.
Hmm.
So your philosophy is learn, earn, return. What does this mean to you?
Well, we've talked about a good education, whether it's college or certification in HVAC or an electrician or a welder. Uh, get focused on a path. That's the learning encounter. That's the very first step of the learn, earn, and return. So then you do that and you start earning a living and most likely develop a family at that point. And then I believe that whatever it is you've learned, whether it's being a great welder or a great pilot, you need to share at that point. The returning is really sharing the wisdom, the practical wisdom that you've gained, and those life skills that start with uh, your faith, your belief in God, and doing what's right and being able to help others. So it's not just like we're doing today. I'm sharing this story with you and your audience. There's a money component to that, but you don't need to be a millionaire to return. That return is just volunteer work. It's all important, and we all can do that.
So Niswonger Foundation has focused on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I have a question for you, which is, um, do you ever see a scenario where the Niswonger Foundation could expand the STEM offerings in high schools to like a high school version of the philosophy of freedom, founding principles of America, and practical entrepreneurship as well?
I hope I've got enough time left on the planet to do exactly what you just said. It's
Wow.
critically important.
Yep.
I'll give you an example. A friend of mine, I serve on the board of Ballad Health, which is the Niswonger Children's Hospital and 20 other hospitals. And Alan Levine is board of governors at Florida for all the state schools. And he actually was able to bring that board together to vote that if you're in higher education or high school, I believe, in Florida, that you will have a civics course. You will have a course in citizenship and the things that we're just touching on the fringe. And you can't graduate from university in Florida without that. And if you ever watch one of the programs, I think it's Jesse Waters, where he's got the guy with the microphone going out to these cities and saying, you know, who do we fight in the Second World War? Who won? Who won it? Who do we fight? I mean, our kids are clueless.
Yep.
They're not getting anything about the foundational principles of how and why God Almighty has allowed the United States, excuse me, to exist
Yep.
for 250 years. And I thought we were getting close to losing it, but I do
So,
have
so did
faith
I,
that we're
by the
not.
way. So did I, by the way.
So,
I just want to say, I would love to help you with this, however you would have me.
well,
I think this is probably the most important thing that we train up the next generation in the philosophy and the theology and the practical elements of what made the American experiment succeed this far.
yeah, couldn't agree more. And I'll share something that isn't really public. It's not private knowledge, but I haven't gotten out in front of this yet. But we're developing another portfolio for the Niswonger Foundation. It exists, the entity exists, and what we're going to do with that is make angel capital available, be able to advise young startups. I've got a person sitting 20 feet from me that spent her career in manufacturing and doing the accounting work for a whole series of companies. And so she looks at the business plan. And what I want to do, you see the Gulfstream behind me, the model of my airplane. Well, pilots say when you take the last flight west, meaning you've moved on to be with the good Lord, that there's sustainability here at the foundation. And rather than me, quick story. Winter night, I'm sitting at the airport, beautiful orange sunset, and I'm reading a prospectus from Blackstone and BlackRock and about investing in a very large multifamily housing development in San Diego. And I thought about that and I looked out the window for a moment and I'm like, well, I'm sure there are lovely people in San Diego, but why don't I invest that money in my own community, in my own region for the benefit of those that live here and those that will follow us? And so that was just one of those God moments, if you will, that redirected my focus to making those investments most of the time right here. And whatever time the good Lord gives me on this planet, whatever I've got left, it's going to be in investing in our community and our region to make us all stronger. I always say this, and I've started a couple of projects that it's not about it. It isn't about the money, but I've taken on projects that I knew I would never make. I've got one right now. I'll never make a dime on it. But when it's complete, it's going to put a lot of people to work. And I'm fond of saying, whoever's next at something similar will probably knock the cover off the ball. But you just have to get that started and get that ball rolling in some cases.
Well, that's a good segue into what I'm working on and what you're also supporting. But I just wanted to mention something that's kind of tangentially related. I only just recently learned that, the Declaration of Independence was 1776. Immediately preceding that was a religious revival that swept through the American colonies in the 1730s and 1740s, known as the Great Awakening. I didn't know about that. And so I feel like there's also a very strong connection there in the lead up to the creation of America, effectively, the growth in faith that preceded that. And I think that's important just to kind of mention, and that's something I'm planning on learning more about. So I'm working on the Freedom Center, and this is uh, at Tusculum University and growing. And so the focus is teaching the philosophy of freedom and practical entrepreneurship. Um, and so I have this theory that entrepreneurs who build their businesses with a solid foundation of knowing Jesus and understanding the philosophy of freedom and capitalism will actually be the most determined entrepreneurs. And I think determination is probably the attribute that is like most predictive of entrepreneurial success. And it also reminds me of a quote. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. So I think there's this real opportunity to, I think there's this real opportunity here. And so my sort of immediate goal is that applications are now open for students entering college in fall 2025 to participate in this Freedom Scholars program. And so I wanted to use this as an opportunity to say, if you're interested, send an email to freedom@tusculum.edu and say you're entering college. And we'll then share this application process with you. Quick update. After we filmed this episode, we set up a dedicated email address for applications. If you are a student entering college next year, interested in studying the philosophy of freedom and starting your own startup business, apply now. Email freedomstartups@gmail.com. That's freedomstartups@gmail.com, so that you can participate in this program, learn about the philosophy of freedom, learn the principles to start your own business, and maybe end up having Scott Niswonger as an angel investor in your startup. And the other thing here is other donors interested in supporting this can reach out and express interest in contributing, and other universities who want to sign up for this program, because I view this as being able to grow into, I mean, think of all of the students in public schools where this is an opportunity, but also students in homeschools. I think a lot of them are asking themselves, are there universities out there that I can go to where I can get a classical great books education? And that's what we're looking to provide. So so I think there is a huge opportunity here. And I wanted to ask if, given your experience, there are any other lessons you may have learned, say, from the Purdue Research Foundation or the ETSU Research Corporation. Just any other advice that you have for me about this startup?
Well, as you know, I've seen the curriculum, the 7 or 8 courses, and I think it can be magical for people that are interested. Um, you're, I don't want to sound arrogant here, but if you're just out to make money, start something and make money, and that's it, that's the end of your universe, you're a very hollow, shallow person. You, to be able to understand how we got this opportunity to participate in what you're offering, you have to know that. You have to know the history. You have to know the faith of the people that were behind this. If you understand that history and you have faith in Jesus Christ, I wake up every day feeling like I want to get there. I want to see what we can do next. And it's just this enlightened feeling. And so not only do I think it's a great idea and unlike anything else that I've ever seen, to the extent that you want my involvement, I'm willing to offer that in terms of the funding that's necessary here. And I know there are a couple other of our board members at Tusculum that feel the same way. But it's like learn, earn, return. You put understanding the gift we've been given, a 1 in 7 chance you'd be an American when at birth, the faith that is behind all of that goodness, and then the entrepreneurial spirit. That's the equivalent of learn, earn, and return, those three.
Well, thank you, and yes. So I just sort of wanted to end by asking you about, your wife and family. And this is sort of coming from the perspective of you've had a tremendously successful entrepreneurial career. I've met, I've met, I've met, I've met people, yeah, I think especially women these days who maybe get the impression that as important and fulfilling as career is, I don't know, I get the sense that there are a lot of people out there who are devaluing, like not putting value on as much value as they should on their family. And so as someone who's had a tremendously successful entrepreneurial business career, I just wanted to ask you about family and perhaps you could speak to, the importance of family.
I can. You just amuse me of something. I have my first CFO, or my second CFO, I guess, at Forward Air. So, as a man by the name of Andy Clark, his middle initial is C. And he always says, when we're talking and he's on his way to the Grand Canyon or somewhere else, and he says, at ACC Management, we understand the necessity of the proper work-life balance. And in the early days, I lost sight of that. I lost sight of that. It was costly. These days, with grandkids running around, little ones and some big ones, that time is more valuable to me. And honestly, I just feel better about it. I just feel better when I know tonight I'm having dinner with a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old. And I look forward to that. And one other small bit before I have to go here to an airport commission meeting is I hope I didn't just forget it. But anyhow, we were on
Talking about the importance of family.
I know. Sorry. I've told my children that I don't want to take away from them the self-esteem and value that you get from doing whatever it is you want to do. I never encouraged any of them to learn to fly. I never encouraged any of them to come into the business. I've got one that's in, but that it's important that they make their own way. And we've got, I think, 3 or 4 teachers in the family, and that's some of the most important work that I know of. It's certainly work that both of us are involved in, is that teaching component. But at again, on the last flight west, everything that I have will remain here with the foundation to continue to do that work. And the children, they're not children, but my children understand that and are quite fine with it. You see too many instances, usually the bigger names, of trust fund babies that don't have a clue what it took for the father or grandfather to build that business and create all of those jobs and improve communities, quality of life within communities. where they live. And so they never got it. They're lost. They're just lost children. And I don't want that to happen with mine. And so they're all gainfully employed, yay, and have been for a long time. And so that's my approach to my own family. Yeah, I've done all of this, but what I'm doing is no more important than my daughter-in-law, who's a English teacher, Leslie, over at Greenville High School. My son, who's a PE teacher out of Mossheim. I mean, that's like nursing and other health professions where to be good, it's really a calling. And I'm as proud of them as if they were president. So,
Well, congratulations on your journey. I thank you so much for the opportunity, and I'm excited by the journey ahead.
well, thank you. I've enjoyed very much spending an hour with you today. And I look forward to seeing you soon, getting that curriculum up and running, and talking to some young people that think they might want to start their own business.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay.
Take care.
You're welcome.
Okay. Bye now.
Matt.
This episode of The Matt Sweeny Show is open sourced under the MIT license. You are free to download, use, copy, modify, merge, publish, distribute, sublicense, sell. Yes, you can use it commercially, so long as you include this notice and link to mattsweeneyshow.com. Thank you to my beautiful wife, Tusculum University, listener kids, and our contributors for making this episode possible. Support freedom and more episodes like this by contributing at mattsweeneyshow.com.